So today I'm going to be taking a look at a Pierre Paulin watch, which is a sub-brand of the Merkur watch group off of AliExpress. Full transparency, I was sent this watch to review, so I don't have to send the watch back, but I also don't have to show them the video before it's out. These are all my own thoughts, all my own opinions, and this hasn't swayed my review in any way. It's just thankfully I have the watch physically here and didn't have any time crunch in how I had to review it. So we have a diameter of about 38.2, lug to lug of 46.2, height of 13 millimeters with that heavy dome, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications here, we're going to have what is considered a Merkur in-house developed manual eye movement. I don't know, how much credence to put on that in-house part of it, but this is also not a movement I've really seen before. You can't see it through the case back, so I'll have a little picture included here to the right that I took when I took the case back off. It looks fairly nicely finished. It's not anything crazy. It is all just machine finishing, so it is rough in some parts, but it's nicely architectured, and at least for the way it winds and the actual action of the hands, it is actually a pretty good, pretty stable feeling movement. On the front, we have just classic acrylic, very highly domed, case back, of course, closed. 50 meters of stated water resistance with just a regular push-pull crown. And last but not least, this watch retails for about $115 to $130 depending on variations, and that is kind of the special that they're having for the 11/11 sale for AliExpress, I think up until this Saturday and possibly a little bit longer. So starting off with the dial here, I do think it's very well done and actually pretty great for the price point. We do have kind of a copper-ish salmon type dial here. I do think it leans a little bit more copper, but it is a really beautiful color that you don't see too often. We of course have this sector styling with a kind of more matte blasted inner portion, and then the circular hours track, which is done in a brushing, which brings to life the watch a little bit at different angles, and I think just looks pretty premium. The actual printing and numerals are all done in the same black ink, which is very consistent, and then we have a pop of blue with the sub-seconds and the syringe hour hands, which to me, they pop the same way actual heat-treated blued hands do. It doesn't state on the website whether or not these are heat-treated, but to me, they look that way, and they are relatively good-looking, so much better than painted at least. I do enjoy the classic, simple sector styling of this watch, the way each hour portion is somewhat blocked off into their little chunks. Of course, we only have the 12/3 cutoff 6 and 9 actually written out, but each section, whether or not it actually has a numeral, has that little space for it, and it just feels very cohesive. It feels consistent, and to me, it's a cool design. Text they also kept very minimally here, just Pierre Paulin at the top, and then Levy at the bottom, or I don't quite know how you say that, but it's Levee. Just probably a name that is under the Merkur group, quote unquote, to make it sound a little fancier. We've got a little alliteration there, and looks pretty decent on a dial. So taking a look at the watch in natural light, you can see the copper tone becomes a little bit brighter, it comes out a little bit more. At off angles, it becomes a little bit darker, but direct light really makes it pop out, of course, along with the blued hands. So it has a little bit of life to it, but doesn't change overly. Looking in more shaded light, you can see the watch becomes much more uniform in color. It becomes a little softer. There really is no dual color to it, except when you go off angles, it becomes a little bit darker, a little bit more deep in coloration. So it is a relatively stable dial, a pretty nice dial, both in sunlight and out of sunlight. You see it off angles, that distortion from the acrylic crystal does come out to play, so that's a little fun aspect to it. On wrist, the watch looks just as good. The brushing pops out, becomes very bright in this kind of even shaded light, and thankfully this is a watch that's pretty consistently good outside, inside, and I praise it for that. Taking a look at this dial up close, and we have a lot of beautiful detail that comes to life. Of course, the printing is actually done fairly well. It's clean, there isn't a lot of splotching or any misprints. I would like to see it gone over just a couple more times to add a little bit of thickness to it, but as it stands, I can't complain, especially for the price. There is that tiny little misprint there right below the V. I don't know if that's ink or part of the dial defect, but it's there. The base dial has this grained metal texture to it, where of course the outer dial has the brushing, and the outermost little portion has, again, that continuation of the grained dial with a little bit of a railroad seconds track on the full outboard. The hands themselves, of course, having this heat blue type luster to them, very deep tone, really inky and just almost lacquered feeling. It's a really beautiful tone, and again, I do pretty much assume these are heat blued. I don't think much other processes could get it to look this clean or this close to heat blue treatment. I love the fact that they went for a skeletonized hand here. Not only is the hand shape itself very nice, super thin here towards the actual hand stack, and then growing and then thinning out towards the end, but they also just kept a nice thickness of it all the way through. The skeletonization is an awesome aspect because this isn't really a watch that needs lume. I think it dresses it up, the fact that this is skeletonized. I think lume on only the hands, or if they include lume anywhere on the dial, would have just kind of ruined the cleanness of it. And I love that they committed themselves to that. Looking at the hour hand, similarly just as clean, similarly well done. Funnily enough, there really isn't any blemishes on these hands. They are pretty perfectly done. You see maybe a little bit miscoloring towards the actual base hand stack there, and of course the center pinion isn't that clean. But overall, in terms of like just a general handset, they are actually really well executed. Looking at the subseconds here, not only do we of course also have a heat blue subseconds hand, but we do have concentric circling, which is just a nice little breakup in texture for the watch. Doesn't detract too much, but it's just a nice little play there. I think it looks pretty nice. And then there at the very bottom, I don't really know what that text there at the 6 o'clock means, but it's there. Overall, really good dial. The small little details are executed nicely, and I think for a watch that's just over $100, this is way better than you would expect. Taking a look at the case here, and I think this is probably the least refined part of the watch, but also still fairly well done. We see we have pretty much all brushing. There isn't really any high polish anywhere on the watch case itself, which I don't mind. I think an all brush watch definitely leans a little bit sportier. I think can be done still as well. I mean, the Royal Oak doesn't have much polishing on it. And as we see here, I think it just kind of fits the theme of the watch. The most interesting aspect of the case, I think, and what's done pretty well, is this stepped bezel. We have the bezel kind of stepped up a little bit from the actual base case and moved a little bit more inward. And it is completely flat on the top and then has a circular brushing on the top side. The side of the bezel also is brushed. So it just has this very clean, flat appearance. It has a little bit of architecture to the case that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And to me, it just looks very good. I will say I think the crown is a little too large. It's on the larger side. It's kind of like a modified onion-esque type crown, which only knurling on the very outside, which is an odd choice. In terms of gripping and winding and everything else, it is very nice. But you could have easily gone with a much flatter crown, which is a lot of knurling that I think would have been just as good. We do have a nice little logo done there inside the crown, kind of etched in and then blasted, which I think is a nice touch. Some vertical brushing on the case side and drilled lugs, which I really like to see. It's a very nice touch. One interesting part about this case shape, and it was kind of hard to notice at first, but it has fairly flat lugs, and then towards the end there's like a little bit of a cut and then dip. It's very subtle. It's super odd at first because you don't really notice it. You just think they're flat lugs, but it adds a little bit of shape, a little bit of geometry. I do think the case would have benefited overall from just either shorter lugs or a little bit more of a rounded case shape there, just because it can feel and wear very flat on the wrist, which some people might like. It makes it feel a little bit bigger than it is, but I do think the case shape could benefit from a little bit more finesse, a little bit more roundedness, a little bit more of a well-wearing, softer shape. And then you'll see parts like this where the brushing isn't terribly well done. You'll see more defined lines in it. It isn't completely uniform. But again, for the price, you're just paying a little over $100. It's very forgivable. It's done fairly well otherwise, and it comes together as a whole package to be very worth the price. Looking at the case back, we just have the engraved lion here, designed and made by the Merkur Watch Group. I guess that's the logo of their group, kind of a sunray finish done there. Not too bad, and can't complain really. And then before I move on, this is actually the standard strap that comes with the watch. It is kind of a quote-unquote throwaway genuine leather watch strap, but I will say for all the AliExpress watches I've tried and all the kind of relatively cheap watches under, let's say, $500 that I've tried, this is one of the most comfortable straps I've actually come across. This is very much a serviceable strap that you can actually wear on the watch. I think tone-wise it works very well, and you could undoubtedly wear this for a very long time. I will say the main bane of this watch's existence is that on the little keeper here, they kind of meet at a point that feels a little bit on the rough side. I'm sure you can maybe sand that down or something to make it feel a little bit smoother. But that's the only part about the strap that makes it not feel as premium as everything else, because otherwise, this is a strap that has the feel of, like, let's say a $40 strap by itself. But this keeper kind of cheapens it out and makes it feel not as great on wrist. But it probably will soften a little bit over time as well. So moving on to how this watch wears. Earlier, I was wearing this Zodiac quote-unquote Pineapple Dream. And here we have it sitting on my 6.5-inch wrist. As you can see, the lug to lug is definitely not too long at all. Fits within the bounds of my wrist very well. Even if I move it up and I have closer to a 6-inch wrist there, still fits, still fairly proportional. Again, the crown is just a little bit on the big side. It definitely sticks out from the case a little bit, so not my preferred size for the crown. But the watch case itself, very thin to the wrist, wears closely. There aren't any parts about it on wrist that feel sharp or unrefined or doesn't feel comfortable on wrist, so that's a really nice touch. And the way the brushing is done actually is just pretty nicely done. It does grab the light nicely, it grabs it uniformly, it feels fairly premium for the price point. Looking at it from the side view there, again, a fairly thin profile, sits very comfortably into the wrist and close to the wrist. Again, dial giving most of that height, and of course, because this is a true acrylic crystal, you're getting some of that distortion, some of that domage, some of that, quote-unquote vintage flair to the watch. If you want to add a little bit more color to this watch, the Vario distressed Italian leather I think looks great with it. Plays a little bit off the blue hands whenever it does pop out. And yeah, super comfortable strap and looks great. And there we have it. Again, pretty comfortable watch on the wrist. The strap I think pairs pretty well with it. I will say, because you have these relatively thick lugs that are, a little bit on the beefy side, a more tapered strap does feel a little bit odd on the watch. This is a 20-16, whereas the original one was about a 20-18. So I think that's a little bit more of a good fit. I think even a 20-20 would probably be the best. Next, for a little bit more of a fun look, we have this textured, I forget what they call it, I think it's houndstooth, strap from Strap Bandits, I believe. I'll have it linked down below. I think it pairs really well with the watch. It gives it a more vintage feeling look, nice brown playing off the copper tone, and just is fun. Looks really good to me. Again, to me the case presents a little bit sportier because those slightly beefier lugs. If they thinned it out and rounded the case off a little bit more, I think it could be a little bit more of an elegant feeling watch. And although this guy doesn't make straps anymore, this is previously King Leathercraft, you can get just a similar natural Buttero leather from Deluxe or anywhere else, and it'll kind of age into this nice, really cognac-y, caramelly color. I think it just pairs really well with that copperish tone, and to me is kind of a nice, almost monochromatic feel to the watch. There we have it on wrist. And I think you can see what I mean. This is another 20-18 strap, and this just looks a little bit more cohesive with the watch, just a little bit better than a huge taper. And lastly, the classic white archer silicone adds a little bit of fun to the watch, a little bit of a pop of color. There are no white tones, but I don't think this looks bad on the watch by any means. So yeah, I think it pairs pretty well. This by comparison is a 20-20 strap. This doesn't have any taper to it, and I think looks great on the watch. Just balances it pretty well, doesn't look too odd one way or the other, and is, I think, just a great combo. So pros and cons for this watch, and I think one of the biggest pros for me is just gonna be the dial itself. I think they did a really good job in terms of finishing for the dial, the brushing, the more blasted section, just the printing overall. It is a very high quality looking dial and has a lot of life to it in terms of like color changingness, the way the blue hands pop against the dial, the skeletonizations of the hands to begin with, the not use of lume that I think would ruin the dial design. It all is executed fairly well and very good for the price. Moving on from that point, I do think the price for value ratio is super high on this. The case shape is done fairly well. The movement feels very nice. Again, the dial quality is really nice. So you're getting a really good mechanical watch that wears fairly well for 120 bucks, give or take. So that's, you're getting a lot. There's plenty of stuff out there for that price, but this executes it to a level that I think is really nice and you'll be surprised by. And last but not least, as a tiny little pro, it's nice to see another sub 40mm case. It's starting to become more popular, but it's nice to see the trend continue. This is already a relatively large wearing watch for its little 38 and change size, so if it was at 40mm, it would mainly be for bigger wristed people. So I think it's very well proportioned for the size it's at. Moving on to cons, and realistically, I don't have many, but I do think one of the bigger cons for me is I do think the case shape needs a little bit more refinement. It is a good basic bare bones type case shape as it stands, and they try to add a little bit more finishing and uniqueness with the lug design, but I just do think there can be refinement, thinning out the case a little bit, thinning out the lugs a little bit, curving the entire case a little bit more. It's already a thin watch, so lean into that and make it a little more elegant, a little more classy, and that's kind of what the salmon dial, or sector dial really, is kind of screaming for, a classier, more elegant, more timeless case shape. My only other real con with the watch is the crown size. It's a little bit large, it's a little bit oddly shaped, and it sticks out a lot from the case body. It just does not look perfectly at harmony with the design to me. I think a very flat, close to the case crown would look amazing and just tie the watch in together a little bit more. yeah, I just don't think it's the perfect crown design for this watch. Final thoughts, and I was pleasantly surprised by this watch. When you're kind of getting something from AliExpress, you never quite know whether it's going to hit or miss in person. Some elements can look a lot better in photos, and sometimes they're not even photos. They're like just photoshopped things. So this one lives up to its design and arguably maybe is even better in person. I like the fact that they have so many dial variations. They have some classic, they have some fun colors, and again, the dial quality is very nice. I wouldn't be mad if this came in on a $500 watch, on an $800 watch, or maybe even a $1,000 watch, of course with a little bit more added refinement here and there, but it is a perfect base to work off of and something that I think is not only acceptable for the price, but absolutely you're getting way more than you pay for. The only point of contention I think you can have with buying this watch is if you don't like the case shape or if you don't fully buy into the movement here. Again, they're saying it's a Merkur in-house developed kind of movement. Sure, they probably got it from something else. Or it's architectured heavily off of something else. So we don't know how long it's going to last for, but from what I've experienced, it's a nice movement in operation. The functions work very well. The winding doesn't feel cheap or grainy or not put together in a sense. It just feels pretty sturdy. And worst comes to worst, honestly, if it breaks in, let's say 5-10 years, you got a lot of life out of that watch that was only a little bit over $100. And in theory, hopefully you can order one again and maybe it will be better quality at that point. So it's one of those things where this maybe is not a forever watch, but for the price, it's a great thing to try out. I think it's very well done overall, and there's not much bad to say about it. Anyway, those are just my opinions. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. Let me know down below if I'm right, if I'm wrong, what you think about the watch, if you pick one up. And yeah, I'll see you in another one.